morning.
Evening.
Just a discussion.
We're using these?
Yeah, yep.
She's gonna, you don't need to be right here.
We can hear you.
Couldn't we say it?
Even when you're brooding.
You were planning. Oh, you're introducing everything.
That's how close you're up to. It's right here. We need to put one
A glass of red, they got
Are they,
tequila.
are you doing on PowerPoint? Seriously?
Yeah, we got it all.
Water and.
Do you need
Yeah,
that?
I put
I
something
got
else.
it. We're
You
set
got
up.
it all set up?
You don't ruin it.
Don't touch it.
At work.
and then make
Don't
it.
touch
it.
Well, no, we came early to make sure.
Do the review.
We're on, we have this meeting tomorrow that I'm hoping is
What are
right.
these? Updates for us.
I don't know, nothing was done. Why? Sent them out. What did you do?
Did you get your tickets for it? Did you, are you there? For the ladies, empty rules. It's like,
She says it's gotten too crowded.
it's pretty good.
It was.
They're overdoing it.
It's pretty good.
She'd rather pay more and have fewer people so you can actually do it. Because you can't
Fair
really
point.
move, she said.
Fair point, yeah. So, but that was- that's
Is it 4 o'clock or 5?
4.
4.
That's all.
That's
That's already on the new time for next spring.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting for November 12th. I am Councillor Schwartzenberger, and I'll be chairing the meeting today. Off to the CAO, do we have any late items?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do not have any late items to attach to this agenda this evening.
Great, then I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated. Councillor Grice and Mayor Johansson, all in favor, opposed, carried. Adoption of the prior minutes, the minutes of the October 28th Committee of the Whole meeting.
So,
Thank you, Councillor Mattis, seconded by Councillor Ventimiglia. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Water matters. The first of our water matters is the 10-year water and sanitary systems capital plans. The Director of Operations report is attached, and we have Steve Underwood from True Consulting here as well. So I'll pass this over to Mr. Goodsill.
Thank you, Chair Schwartzenberger. True Consulting has been working over the last year on updating our water and sanitary systems capital plans. The previous plans were a little outdated, plus a majority of the work had already been completed on those plans. The water capital plan was previously done in 1994 and updated in 1999, and since then we've completed a majority of the projects. And then the sanitary system plan, this new plan replaces the old 2002 liquid waste management plan. And Steve and I were discussing it should be updated every 5 to 10 years regardless. Anyways, things change. So with these plans, it gives staff and council a little direction in the coming years, what things that we need to look at, things that we need to update in our systems, and I'll leave it with Steve, and he can kind of go through it with you guys if you have any questions along the way.
There we go. That's my turn.
It's your turn.
There we go. I have a bit of a PowerPoint presentation. What I'm trying to do here is we have 2 reports, 2 capital plans. I'm trying to do a combined presentation to speed everything up and just go over the highlights of the 2 reports. The highlights are similar, which is why it's kind of combined into one. Like Sean just mentioned, the reports that we were updating were way out of date. The 2002 liquid waste management plan update, and there was an update to the water capital plan that was done in 1999. And so those documents are so far out of date, and we were looking at the capital plans wondering, did we need to do those projects anymore? And so that was where we came up with the idea of, well, better just do a real update, kind of the new capital plan. It's important to point out that in 2002, we projected a 2016 population, so in the year 2016, of 6,053 people in Oliver. That's kind of key because we didn't see that population growth, but the capital plans imagined it. So the infrastructure we were building was looking at that 6,053 population. Also in 1999, our water consumption was 3,400 liters per person per day. That's on a maximum day. That's a big number. And we've done a lot of work in Oliver over the last basically 20 years to try and bring that number down. And so when we go to look at the next capital plan, we look at where we are at today. And in 2016, the population was 49,28. So that's basically 1,100 people less than the previous capital plans imagined. And we've reduced our water demand by half. So we're at 1,600 liters per person per day, which means our infrastructure was all sized for 6,000 people drinking 3,500 liters a day. Now we only have 5,000 consuming this much water and generating therefore that much sewer. So our systems are robust, and as a result, there's not a lot of capital upgrades proposed in capital plans. So when we go through the capital planning process, and just as a high-level overview, we project what the population will be in the future. We associate demands with that, and then we analyze your system to see what effects that population growth over the next 10 to 20 years will be, and where the weak points are in the system, and we recommend upgrades for it. We also look at your supply and your treatment in all your pumping stations and making sure that they can also handle this increased population growth. The last capital plans basically imagined this same population growth, so it's not a surprise that the systems can basically handle it already. The fifth thing we did though is we looked at your systems from an asset management lens. That's something that most sort of historic capital plans haven't done, but asset management is a newer thing, so we did do a asset management basically section in both of the plans. So we took the 2016 population and we increased it at 1% for this capital plan. The previous capital plan had, in 1999, say, increased everything at 2 or 2.2 or 2.5% per population. That's how they got to 6,035 people for 2016. We're projecting for 2038, 6,130. So we're basically projecting the same amount of people as the last capital plan is projected. And we're also projecting with a lower water demand now. In the report, there's figures such as this. This is the sewer network that's been modeled with that increased flow and wet weather. And in here, there's some pipes that are hard to see, but there's one in this circle right here, that's it blown up. That pipe fails in the town of Oliver, sanitary system. There's two more that are yellow, two more areas. They're down in near Public Works, and there's some by tucked into a lake. You can see they're just a different color. And in the legend, that means those pipes are between 1/2 full and 2/3 full in the worst case flow conditions at the end. So it's showing us that there's not, in the whole collection system, there's really nothing that's undersized that needs to be massively upgraded. There's a few areas that are starting to go over what we call half full, which is where they start to be failed. We usually design them to only flow over half full. And there's just a few pipes in town that get that way in sewer. In the water system, there's a few ways of measuring whether or not the system's impacted. One of them is your service pressure. That's what this figure is out of the report. And it basically shows adequate pressure throughout the entire system during peak hour in the growth scenario. So the system as is robust and can handle the increased population. We have recently built 2 pipes. One of them is right here and tucked into a lake. And the other one was we converted the reservoir supply main from CPR and Lions to be a distribution main. those two improvements by themselves really brought out any concern that was in the previous water capital plan, and as a result, there's no concerns here. There was some minor drops in our ability to meet what we're considering is acceptable fire protection as the demand increases. So as we grow and we start putting more water out to demand, our ability to provide fire protection starts to decline because we're supplying it as peak hour demand. So there are, as a result, a couple of failures from a fire flow perspective in the water capital plan. So these three deficiencies is what the water capital plan identifies. The first one is the storage volume in our reservoirs can be considered by some standards as substandard. When we sized the reservoir that was recently constructed, we looked at balancing your peak demands and sizing the water or the reservoir appropriately to not have a whole bunch of stagnant water up there during lower demands. And so by some measures, when we get to the 2038 demand, it could be considered undersized. The fire flow to the hospital won't meet what we consider current standards in 2038, and same with the fire flow to Tuckanwood Elementary. When those two facilities were built, the fire flow that we would normally supply to those buildings would have been lower, but in 2020, they're just marginally deficient, but they are. So we've recommended, three upgrades to address those three deficiencies. One is a new crossing of the Okanagan River at the Public Works Yard that connects to Sawmill Road. That will address the fire flow deficiency at the hospital. And it also provides another crossing of the river. We have two, one on the bridge and one on the pedestrian bridge. I guess a third one at Buchanan Road out in the rural area is another crossing, but this would be a third crossing in town, and if something were to happen on the main bridge, this one would be another primary, I guess, crossing to move water across the river. Upgrading or building a new water main on Park Drive. There isn't currently a water main in front of Tuckanwood Elementary, so building a new water main on Park Drive to loop the water system to Merlot will address the deficiency in fire flow at the Tuckanwood Elementary. We're proposing to also add standby power at the Tuckanwood wells, and we're going to use that as a method to mitigate the reservoir undersizing. So in where we can consider ourselves deficient would be emergency storage. So during a power failure, the reservoir might be considered to drain too quickly. If we could run a generator, we'd be able to buffer out that lack of storage that's currently existing. So we think it's money better spent to build a generator at the well field as opposed to building a new tank up above the town.
Which would cost probably $1 million.
Yeah, well, yes, much more than $1 million. And you have an existing round tank that you guys are through maintenance keeping alive.
Mm-hmm.
One day in the future, Sean's going to say, I can't keep that reservoir, functioning any longer because it's just too old. And then at that time, we'd probably consider demolishing it and rebuilding a new one that's slightly bigger to address this deficiency. But in the interim, we would run with the generator. The last one is to loop the water main or the water system in conjunction with development, and this refers to we call it the northwest sector, the four properties just north of town on the highway. Looping back towards the Buchanan well will just make the system more redundant and allow us to bring more water more reliably from that source. And there's a figure at the end that shows you where all these pipes are. The sewer system deficiencies were even less. We identified 6 pipe segments that flow grid station pumps reach their capacity, meaning we might need some bigger pumps. It's a pretty minor issue again, but they're basically something to watch. And so our recommendations for those were to Public Works would be to monitor the pumping at those stations to watch for that failure. Public Works has been looking into maybe buying a sensor that they can install in a manhole lid to monitor flow rate in their pipes. These 6 pipes would be ones that they should monitor. We also pointed out as part of this report that inflow and infiltration started to occur in Oliver about 2 years ago. At the same time that 2 land development projects were occurring near the river. So these same monitoring devices can be deployed to try and source out where that inflow is coming from. The other thing we noticed is we had real troubles correlating your flow data to rain data, because the rain data we get comes from Penticton, it doesn't come from Oliver. So installing a rain gauge would be really helpful to try and time rainstorms in Oliver to flow rates that are occurring in the collection system. So we also recommended that we install a rain gauge. So with not a lot to recommend for capital, I guess it was timely to look at asset management. So with asset management, we've been gathering lots of good data about all of our systems and putting it into their GIS system. And we're tracking the age, condition of the assets, and using those criteria, we can generate a probability of an asset failing. But then we can compare that with how critical the asset might be to try and come up with a rating of risk for any of the linear assets that we have. And so looking at the, again, these maps are, we generate, I wonder if I turn off the light, is that easy?
Yeah, yeah.
And the colors don't come out very well.
Is it unplugged?
In the reports, you can see these figures, but this would be the risk of, the risk kind of rating of all the pipes. So the green pipes have a low risk. You can see a legend over here. There should be orange and red. So there's a medium and high risk. And this is sanitary, but you can see a lot of all the sewer comes to the public works yard here. So basically all the pipes that have a lot of sewer flowing through it and that are old would create a high risk. And so and then some of these other ones where we've been cameraing all the sewer pipes in the last few years, so we know they're in a more of a deteriorated state. And they have higher amounts of flow going through them, they generate a red in the risk. And then there's another series of pipes in here that we've colored orange that may be in a lower deterioration state or have less flow. So what we've tried to do with this matrix is focus public works attention on the highest, what we consider to be the highest risk assets. We're not saying that they have to run out and replace them, but we have, by reviewing their current condition and we've identified whether or not they can be relined, so rehabilitated, or whether we think they should be upgraded to a larger size to allow for future development or an increased flow that we're seeing from this capital plan. And basically we've given that to the town in their GIS system, or the public works guys. So when they're generating projects, if they're looking at rehabilitating a road, they have these layers too to turn on and look at and decide whether or not they can go have a second look at some of those red pipes that we said were in a deteriorated state. If we're going to redo a road, we could go camera it one more time to see if it's deteriorated a little bit more, to just decide whether or not to replace it. But these are the ones that are the most important for the town to be looking at moving forward. Several of them have been added to the 10-year capital plan as placeholders, but they don't have to be done. They can be analyzed again as the years get closer. This is the same for water. We did a similar risk overview. You can see the red and the orange better here. Lots of the big pipes, old ones in downtown, are red or orange, and all the new ones out in the twin system and everything are all generally green. There's the odd anomaly out there that you can see. There's an old AC pipe that we recycled in the twinning that's rated as is medium risk. This list of pipes that we've highlighted red, we did add to the capital plan is recommending to be rehabilitated in the plan. But I think we said it 3 or 4 times in the report, we don't think you need to just run out and replace all these. You do need to go and get a sample of the pipe to look at its condition, to see if it does need replacing or if it's nearing the end of its life. If there's still 30 more years left in some of those pipes, there's no point in replacing them, but these are the ones that you should focus looking at and get some condition data on them. With water systems, we can't camera them like we can in the sewers, so we don't know their conditions. But again, if there's a capital plan or to repave a road on one of these pipes, we should, a year or so ahead, dig up that pipe, get a sample of it, and analyze it to see what condition it might be in before we rehabilitate a road or blindly replace a pipe that still had 30 years of life. But they are getting to near their ends. So
I think that's what the town's been doing, Steve. I mean, there's a lot of projects where they're gonna do a road and then we redo the water pipes.
yeah.
Yeah, that's been our policy, is to do that, to look at the pipes.
Yeah,
We've done that lots of times.
what Steve's saying, and some of the pipes still may be good for 20 or 30 years, so he's
Yeah.
just, you know, if it's still good for 20 or 30 years, you might as well keep it in the ground, right? So
We have like
maybe
in the
just
Hollow
test it.
Street area, those were some of your oldest pipes. They were built in the, I think, the 50s. We did replace them.
Yeah.
Basically because they were old.
And
But
undersized.
We didn't, yes, and several of them were undersized, but we didn't necessarily dig them up, cut a piece out, send it to a lab to see, you know, how much wall thickness was still left in it. Like, we didn't do a thorough analysis, but some of these pipes are your main distribution pipes. They're like the pipe that comes out of the reservoir. It's a large diameter pipe, and it's very critical, which is why it's making this list. If it fails, there's a higher consequence. So we do want to make sure that we're having a look at them and understanding their condition. And I guess replace, as they are all nearing the ends of their lives, replace them as we get there.
Excuse me, Steve, did you want questions as we go along?
Sure, that's fine, yeah.
Councillor Grice.
Thank you, Chair Schwartzenberger. Just while we're on this 6-4 here, I noticed that Earl Crescent was flagged as high risk, but was that not replaced this summer when they did the road work?
The sewers in the back laneway. Are you talking water or sewer?
It's on this.
This is
figure
water.
here.
6-4.
On Earl Crescent, there was only a small component of water on Earl, isn't there?
Yeah, there was.
And we replaced all the services.
Yeah, there's only one block that had water.
Yeah, it was only one block. It wasn't the whole, and then all the sewers in the back laneways for that street. It's just the way it.
So what's highlighted here isn't what was replaced.
We only replaced the services on Earl Crescent. Yeah, the water main, the small section of water main that was on Earl was not replaced. It was fine.
That's an example where we could have maybe sent something to it. We haven't historically sent anything away to be tested by a third party to get a rating on its life. Those services used to exist. The company that did it went out of business. We need to track down a new one and maybe start being more proactive with some of those pipes. Potentially in Earl, that would be an opportunity to cut a piece out and get a rating on its remaining life. Yeah.
Well, the AC pipe, like the asbestos cement pipe, a lot of it is still pretty good, but it depends what type of soils and how it, you know, if it's, I guess, it gets a little punky, like they say, it gets a little more malleable, I guess. So when the pipe starts being that way, then you really have to think about replacing it. But in other sections, like as you get into higher elevations where it's not getting as much groundwater and stuff, those pipes are still could be good for decades still, yeah.
Yeah, and the pipe that we encountered on Earl, from our tests of touching it and drilling into it to put new surfaces, was in good shape.
Yeah, that's another good, when they're replacing the services, would expose the pipe, and if they noticed that something's terribly wrong, we would have heard it first.
So is it high risk on here, on this figure then, just because it's of its age or the type, because it's an AC pipe, or?
Yeah, age,
Okay.
and basically in the modeling, if there's a higher velocity through it, that's showing that there's a higher use through it, so or it could be wearing out faster, so, that, and, the other decision matrix is how many people are out of water if it breaks.
Okay.
So there's several weightings in there, it's not just one that generate a risk score.
So it's more of a potential for risk rather than that
Yeah.
it's in bad shape.
Just trying to balance probability with consequence or criticality.
Thank you.
So in the flipping back between the two reports, the sewer capital plan identified 9 segments of sewer main to consider replacing or rehabilitating through the asset management lens. We also identified that there were several pumps that were at the end of their life. Basically, the town had provided us with the data and we pointed back to them, oh look, that pump's 20 years old. But that's not necessarily capital, that's just operations. If the pump fails, they'll replace it or rebuild it. And so that's what they already do. But we also, in the report, justified delaying desludging of the lagoons. It's been a placeholder in our capital budget that we keep moving out year after year, desludge lagoons. So this capital plan did, I guess, analyze the capacity of the aerated lagoons from the lens of how many people that we actually have and the flow rates that we're generating now, and show that we do have treatment capacity with the lagoons containing the sludge that they have. So we might as well let more sludge build up and desludge them at a later date. We also recommended to conduct a bit of a review of the rotary beach lift station. It was built with 2 force mains. The town had the option of using a smaller one at the beginning and then switching to a larger one. And then it wasn't imagined, but it's possible that we could then run on 2 force mains in the future and run them both. So what we had recommended to the town, I think it's proposed in this year's capital plan, is to just go down there and look at what we can get out of rotary and understand its capacity using all or some of its available force mains that it has. The other recommendation that we made, it was just kind of a big picture one, was look at some of your electrical SCADA because some of those systems are getting old too, and that's a little bit beyond, I guess, our expertise, but definitely that stuff has a life as well and will likely need to be replaced and probably need some budget to be doing that in the next 10 years. The water system, again, we identified 10 of these high-risk pipelines that could be considered for replacement, but we definitely don't want anyone to think that I'm saying go replace them. I definitely think we need to look at them, but these are the 10 that we think you should really look at the closest. If you're again doing any other capital project, you can look at the medium risk ones too, and definitely look at updating them. The other recommendation we made was to update the water conservation plan. I think we're seeing a result of this water conservation, like there's not a lot of capital projects here, and a lot of that's because we've reduced our demand. We don't need new wells, we don't need lots bigger pipes or whatever it is. And so carrying on water conservation would be a wonderful way of keeping this going into the future. And our water conservation plan, I bet you if I looked at it, it would be probably 2007. And we've done a lot. Like Oliver's been a leader in a lot of this water conservation, and Oliver's won awards for what they've been doing. So taking the time to maybe benchmark our demand against the rest of the province's demand or areas, and seeing what we can do next would probably be a worthwhile thing to do in the next year or two. we don't need to go through these in detail, but these would be the projects from a sewer perspective that we highlighted as needing to be upgraded because of future development. There's the pipe nearby the Forbes property, and the one that we started by the hotel going all the way out to Hillside. Those need to be increased investment to meet development needs in the future. Plus, we have had a failure of this pipe in front of the Public Works yard
2008.
in 2008. 11 years ago, that pipe collapsed. So that's, it tells us that some of our infrastructure is reaching the end of its life. And so that pipe is the same pipe that's right here that did collapse. This piece hasn't been upgraded or repaired, so when we do upgrade it, we're going to go to a larger diameter. These are the replacement projects identified again through the risk and criticality.
You got 348th Avenue on there.
I don't know what that is.
Oh, that's the only way I know you're
Wait,
right.
it is, it's cool.
It's
Oh,
cool.
okay. Crossing the bridge, there was, and the town's already fixed them, there was some deficiencies with the pipes there when we did do the cammering. They went out and repaired them within months of identifying them, but that pipe is reaching the end of its life and will likely need to be replaced. And same with the pipe on Co-op. This is the pipe that actually turned orange in the analysis. It is reaching its capacity as well as becoming old and has a large proportion of the town's flow going through it. And the Similkameen pipe is an example of one that's old, and when it was designed, it didn't imagine that all the Rockcliffe neighborhood was going to be going through it, but now all of Rockcliffe is going through that pipe, so it becomes more critical. These are other examples of ones that are identified as replacement. Again, we flagged these on their own special layer in the GIS so that Public Works can review these at budgeting time kind of each year as the projects get imagined. They can turn these layers back on and look at them to decide. McKinney Road, 362nd, is an example of one that qualifies to be rehabilitated or lined. So it's big enough, but it's getting old and or critical, and therefore needs a liner or could qualify for a liner. Often what happens is towns will build up an inventory of ones that they want to line and then do one big project of lining. I don't think Oliver has that big of a list yet. This is the key plan from the water capital plan showing where all the proposed upgrades, they're all numbered when you get to this plan. 1 to 4 are the ones that we were recommending to address deficiencies in the system. So this is number 1, where we're crossing the river at Public Works. Number 2 is on Park Drive in front of the school. 3 is this extra loop. You can see the system is kind of fragmented without this connection here. This brings the water from Buchanan and really creates that extra loop.
Oh, you went to video.
Yeah, what the? Just did it on its own.
I wasn't flipping fast enough.
Come on. Doesn't like
Yeah.
to. There we go.
Number 4 is the Tuckalnuit Wells,
Cool.
or the generator at the Tuckalnuit Wells,
Oh, there we go.
which is here. And then the rest of them you can see are just highlighted in red. Those are the ones that we should look at closer and are slated to potentially be replacements.
Councillor Mattis.
Has to do with the number 1, the crossing there, and then also the replacement of the crossing at the bridge. If we were to, and I don't know what number it is, number 2, I think we'll call it. That one there,
This
yes.
here, yeah.
If we were to upsize that, okay,
Mhm.
and then when you look at your river crossing I notice it comes very, the last segment of it comes very, like if those two were joined together.
Right in here.
Yeah, right in there.
Yeah.
If you up the capacity of the river crossing, would it not make sense to then just join those two points there as a looping and avoid the second crossing?
Yeah, avoiding the second crossing isn't necessarily, like, nowadays, that's not a big expense to drill a pipe under the river, and the extra redundancy. This pipe that you see here wasn't large enough, this would all need to be upgraded. So if we went bigger here, which is what you're suggesting,
Yeah.
we would then have to increase the diameter of all of this pipe here as well through the park. It's a way of creating the same solution, and really you can see we're trying to loop back here to the
On
bottom
spillway.
spillway. Yeah, this loop here is really small diameter as well, and we did look at increasing its diameter to have the same effect, but ultimately the water had to come across the river here because the reservoir's up there, and that was creating the restriction. So the extra crossing of the river did kind of provide the most robust solution. There would be, if we were gonna run out and replace the pipe on the bridge ahead of that, we could look at oversizing it, like you said, and increasing the diameter of the pipe through the park. But if we determine that the pipe on the bridge still has 30 years of life in it, then it's definitely worth keeping it there. That's it, 2 reports in 1 presentation.
There we go.
Thank you, Steve. Any further questions from the council? Go ahead, Nick.
Just maybe you can talk about the capacity of the sewer system.
Yeah, like treatment or?
Yeah, the sewer system, say, OCCD band wanted to add 200 units.
Mhm.
I know we have a contract with them for 300 units. I don't know how many they're using, but I'm just, not saying any numbers or anything like that, just a
Yeah.
magnitude if
When you
that
look
was
at-
there, and that's a possibility in the future with the land that's available there. How would something like that affect our sewer capacity or drive expansion?
Yeah, so the next thing that's going to, I guess, cause capacity concerns at the sewer lagoons is your winter storage pond. It's gonna run out of storage around the 6,100 population, because your current permit mandates you to have 240 days of storage, so you store all winter. The town's never stored for more than 200 days in a row, and we have data going back that supports that. So when we get around the 6,100 people, whether it's in town or OIB or however it is, we are gonna need an upgrade or a change in permit to continue to operate the way we are. And then the next thing is aerated cell. It's called 2, but it's your first aerated cell. And we can probably go well into the 8,000. Like, there's a population number, but it's a ways up there. So treatment and storage and effluent disposal was a big concern for us in 1999, 2002. But you can see as water conservation's occurred, it's become a lot less of a concern from the town's perspective. And therefore, we've increased our capacity basically through water conservation. And if we continue on that line, we'll get even more. But that's that answer.
No, I'm just kind of
Yeah.
looking for the trigger point when, a major expansion, a major capital investment in the sewer. It's one thing to redo pipes in the ground or
Yeah.
large pipes in the ground to handle more flow, but eventually we've got to be able to handle
Mhm.
that flow at the end.
Yeah, we are, we do have, I guess because the capital plan told us to, we were looking at constructing cell 1. And it's looking like that's not gonna be a possibility for us from a land acquisition perspective. When those lagoons were built, the land that they're on was acquired from the Crown, but not enough room for the future cell 1, which is a bad name because it's the 3rd cell. But we have, I guess, developed some intern plans to enhance your current cell two, to be able to do that. That was a $4 million kind of project that we did apply for an infrastructure grant for. And a big cost in that is that when the lagoons were built, the berm between the two lagoons was constructed in a way that didn't imagine one being drained relative to the other. So it's a painful process to try and build an enhancement to something when you can't take half of it offline. But there's not really a big need for that in the current population projections.
Any further questions?
No, I think that kind of gives me an idea.
Councilor Matt?
Have we made application to get more land to build a future number 1, 3?
Yes, we've tried.
We've submitted the application. We retained an environmental consultant. We had that came back saying you need to hire, so we've got that report done. It's not very good because the habitat value up there is high, and so it's not the best.
That's fine. We have a overflow basin at the bottom of the hill on land that we own. Could that be used?
Well, we are using that right now for effluent disposal.
Are we actually using
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
And so that system is great in that it buffers as we need it. If we don't have enough land maybe to commit to more irrigation right now because we don't have enough flow, but in the interim we can use that infiltration basin to get rid of effluent as we need it. And then if we find we're using it a lot, we can expand our reclaimed water irrigation system to.
Yeah, I think we used it a few times this year. And it's when the dam levels get a little bit higher and we need to bring that level down. And then as soon as the golf course, everybody starts turning on irrigation, then you can never almost have enough.
But really, what the future for your lagoons is likely going to be, because we're not likely going to acquire more land, is an enhanced lagoon. So more treatment in a smaller area, so more energy being driven into one lagoon, as opposed to continuing operating in the same way that we're. But those not even in the 2038 don't come close to triggering that need.
Any other questions? Well, we have a proposed motion here that the Director of Operations report be received for information. Have the mover. Thank you, Councilor Grice, Mayor Johansson. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you, Mr. Underwood. Next item 2 is the Gallagher Siphon life cycle costs and risk analysis. The Director of Operations report is attached, so a busy day for Mr. Goodsell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sure all of you had time to go through the 167 pages of the reports. So, as you know, True Consulting's been working on this for a couple of years on and off, and with different designs. So now we're getting down to the point where we need to choose a design and start carrying forward. And it was also recommended to staff that maybe we get a second opinion or a critical analysis of the designs, just to get a second set of eyes for staff and for our consultant, which we thought was a great idea. So we hired Tim Spiegel from SSA Quantity Surveyors, and between staff, our consultants, and Tim, we even conducted a exercise to go through, looked at the two main options, and to look at some of the critical failures, or basically taking a look at all areas of the designs and seeing which one was more viable or which was the better option. So what else did I want to mention? I know that back in August 2020, August 26th, council had asked us to direct staff to begin a new pressurized low head siphon option. At that time, we just did a class D estimate, and using the 60-inch pipe as a viable choice financially with reasonable operational increase. But council also asked us that council direct staff to bring back additional information on whether it was feasible with related costs and potential land acquisitions respecting a new option to pump water out of the river at System 1, and further outline details. That would be at our Buchanan well area, and that was one of the options that we brought forward on August 26th. And I'll probably let Steve explain that option a bit more. When True originally started looking deeper into that one, it didn't make sense. Because I believe there'd be 3 irrigation systems, and more likely 4 would need to be disconnected. You know what, I'll let you explain that one.
Sure.
Yeah. But I think there's a lot to siphon through there. A lot to go through, so why don't we get Steve to maybe discuss the options that we have, and maybe explain a little better than I was doing about the other option that we didn't pour too many resources in. And then Tim can also show you what he came up with and what his recommendations were when he went through the exercises with staff.
Sure.
So Steve, we'll get you to start maybe.
Yeah, so
Is there anything I need to bring up?
I have lots available, as questions come up. I have a whole data stick full of figures and cost estimates and this report.
Okay.
I presented this option already though, so we've kind of been around this one in the August meeting. I came to you and told you kind of about the idea of the low head pumping station to utilize the smaller diameter pipe to go around. And we were looking at the, I guess, business case and whether or not it was something to consider. And the reason it was something that you should consider was you were considering funding this project yourself. You have $5 million worth of money committed from the provincial government, and you have no additional funding. So if we can lower the capital cost sum or an amount, it makes the business case start balancing out for that. The pumping station requires energy, and the pumping station requires replacements of turning parts, which is something that we tried to quantify to help make the decision. When we start looking at the pumping station, and we're playing with, when the designs of pumping station, pumping the water 4 feet into the air or 8 feet in the air, and even those changes are significantly impacting the business case. All these other options that we looked at, like pumping from the river at Buchanan, or pumping further down near where the site crosses the river, all of those require the water to be pumped 100 feet, and the business case failed immediately. The amount of energy required to lift those volumes of water is staggering, and the business case fails right out of the gates for all these other pumping options, even if you're only pumping a third of the flow. So this pumping at 4 feet is what we're hoping to get the pump down to, results in an annual energy cost closer to the $30,000 a year. In most of this analysis, I think we're using a number closer to 60, but we're hoping we can do better and get that down as an annual energy cost. I guess Tim can speak to what we did to inflating those energy costs to index this to inflation. But the ultimate, I guess, plan here now is the comparison is whether or not we build not small, a huge pumping station that lifts the water a small amount and then lets it flow through a 5-foot diameter pipe, which is much more economical to install, or whether we don't do that at all and bite the bullet and do the gravity option, which most of my experience in my career, and Tim can probably speak to it same, is when you have gravity as an option, it's probably the right option. And in this case, it is, if you're receiving infrastructure funding for it, it is, if you're sure about a 100-year life. But in this case, the low head pumping is cheaper, and on the life cycle analysis remains that way for greater than 40 years for sure. The lines are crossing somewhere in the 40 to 60-year range, depending on whether we include financing or don't include financing, or some of these assumptions. And that was really tough for even us to make a recommendation. We were struggling with it, and so this recommendation to bring in someone else to sit down with us, go through the exercise, and help make the decision was really helpful, because it was a third party to say, no, you should do this, and basically the recommendation out of that was to proceed with the low head pump, and not proceed with the gravity siphon. And I don't know if it's maybe an opportunity for you to speak to what we did. Sure. 'Cause I don't want to steal your.
Steal the thunder.
But I can go over more of the project if you guys need more of an outline of what it is. But I'm pretty sure you, from the previous presentations, you understand the concepts that we're dealing with. So. I'll let Tim go.
Thank you. Jim, I'm going to preface my comments by saying the first rule of predicting the future, the only thing you know for sure is you're going to be wrong. We try and distill that into knowing, providing a projection which is reasonable. So what we did was we spent a day going through the estimates, going through the design of each of the options, and we actually went through the life cycle costing inputs and the risk analysis at the same time. And I distilled everything down to smaller reports. There's a lot of backup information. If you want to see if you want to see it, we have it. But what we did is on the risk analysis, we created a matrix. And can you go to that? It's page 4 of the risk analysis.
It's it's page 56 of 61.
Right here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's where it starts, but you actually want to go to page 60.
Or it's,
Or it's
it'd
up
be
on the
hard
screen.
to read that.
60.
So what we did was we identified risk items, the mitigation that could go with them, and the cost implications for the gravity system, the low head, and the probability of each of them actually occurring. So for risk analysis, you look at the probability that they occur, the potential cost, low, medium, possible, and high. The possible is really what you estimate, and the high, we push it up a bit higher than that. We normally run this on a Monte Carlo simulation, but the numbers were close enough that we didn't do that. So what we did was and I'm not going to go through each of these, but the main one that I came up with and that everybody else disagreed on was the archaeological buried artifacts. The potential in the valley bottom is pretty significant. However, a lot of it's already been mitigated because the design goes around some buried cans. The chances are with the low head siphon, which is a lower, which it doesn't go low in terms of excavation, is less of encountering something buried archaeologically. We know that in the estimates already, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, we do have some, the estimates have been inverted, assuming that there have been archaeologists available when the excavation is done. So that if they encounter something, right, it's removed, it's done under a permit. With the permit, what it means is they can continue excavating as opposed to shutting it all down. So this is predicated on that. If you didn't have the permit, the risk would be a lot higher. So this is predicated on the risk being lower because you have to come with a permit, with an archaeologist, and they walk with the equipment. The estimates have been developed assuming a lower productivity rate. So instead of carrying a risk in a separate value, we carry the risk in the estimate itself because that's what's going to be required to be done with the permit. So just to make that really clear. So we're not double counting, we're trying to not double count, we're just trying to make sure we've covered everything. There's buried cans, the pipe alignment has been rerouted. The big issue was an 8-foot pipe for the gravity system. And we've looked at that very carefully. It's not been used that I know of in British Columbia. It would mean people would have to learn how to use it. I'm not sure if the town of Oliver wants to be a guinea pig on it.
Wants to what, sorry?
To be a guinea pig on using it. In terms of, Steve said, the cost of operating a gravity system is reduced, but the capital cost of the gravity system is much higher than the low-end siphon system. So if you flip over to the, can we look at the life cycle cost? And I'm not sure if
Page 53.
the council received, do you know? if the
Yeah, council did receive that,
And
yeah.
did they receive this, the sheet from, the detailed sheet?
Yes, I believe anything that was in your 2 reports there.
So we went through each of the costs, the capital cost, which was adjusted based on our meeting. We adjusted the capital cost for each of the options. That was done by June. They adjusted them based on the discussion we had to make sure that we're at a Class C estimate level now. Correct, Class C, right. And so the risk on that is lower than a Class B estimate. Then,
Right.
Yeah, Class B.
oh, sorry, Class B.
Yeah.
Class B, sorry. And then we looked at the capital cost, and then for each of them we looked at the annual operating costs, the maintenance cost, the maintenance, the maintenance dollars on an annual basis, maintenance on a weekly or daily basis, and the replacement of the major components. So if you flip to the sheet that has the life cycle cost, yeah, this one here. So what we do is we take the capital cost, so in order to be able to compare them reasonably, we escalate them and then we discount them. I used a discount rate of 5%, which is what the provincial government is using. It's accepted as a reasonable rate. I did test it. I did some sensitivity testing on it. I didn't show it in the report because it has a negligible effect on the outcome. The escalation rates, what we assumed was that for capital, it escalates at about 4% per annum. 4% is the long-term 30-year average for escalation for construction costs. It varies up and down, but if you were to smooth it, it comes out to about 4% per annum. Maintenance is about 3%. Again, it's an average CPI. Cyclical renewal, which is construction, we use 4%. And then use of electricity, I assume 3% for the first 10 years and 4% for every year for years 11 to 40. Again, I fiddle with some of those to see what changes them would have in the outcome. It's negligible. It has very little effect. What you can see is that the capital cost differential is so significant that the life cycle cost do not pull the crossover back close enough to say it's worthwhile. In life cycle costing, anything beyond about 30 years, the numbers start becoming fluid. It's very difficult to project beyond about 30 years. I've shown 40 years because that's where the crossover point happened. So I actually showed out, I think, 60 years there.
Mhm. Yeah, and it crosses around 45.
45, yeah, 45. So the recommendation, based on the information we have, projecting out as the best way we can, you can go with the gravity system, but if you're assuming that this is going to be in play, have a life of 70 to 80 years, it probably doesn't make sense. However, you are going to have additional operating costs, right? So you'll save on the capital, but there will be operating costs that you'll have to budget for with the low head siphon. Questions?
Councillor Michelle.
First question I would have is, we keep using much lower figures than the actual true cost, because it, even on that note, it's 9.7 versus 6.4. Well, actually, you know, I left the meeting in August really optimistic, Steve, that the low head siphon, you know, we looked at some preliminary numbers around $7 million, and then when I read this report, I'm going, it's $11 million, not 7. So, you know, that's a big difference. That's a big difference.
You know, if I may, the 6 and 9 are assuming or subtracting the $5 million.
Yeah, I understand that,
That's-
but back in August, we were I kind of left the room thinking we might be able to do this for $7 million on this low head siphon auction, which means $5 million from the government, 2 from us, and we've got $1 million plus in the, you know, this is a doable thing. Now all of a sudden, we're up to 11 point something on the lower.
The big change from that presentation in August to now in the cost estimate is we have sized the pump station and received, you know, quotes for all the pumps. We've got a drawing started of this pump station, so we were able to provide a better cost. And I had used a number of 1.2 million in August. The number is closer to 3.5. That's the change. Yeah, the pumping station is much more expensive than originally had hoped. But I'm coming to you now with better numbers, which is was the point of the exercise. Was August it looked like it could be an option, and then we refined it. We looked closer at it. The cost went up, but it still is an option, and it's a good one.
I understand it's a good one, but in my mind, I was optimistic. Now I'm back to square one, where can we really afford a $1.5 million project without some federal help, without having to chase the feds for some help, you know, and going to that again, because that once again starts to be a really big number for the town of Gallagher.
CAO has a question.
Not a question, just a statement. Like in August when we came forward, that was D class numbers, so they were not close to what it actually costs. They were just quick numbers. So it was indicated at that time that they probably would go up when we got to the actual cost of B class or A class. That you're actually seeing the actual number that's costing you. So
I think you've got to remember that a Class D estimate carries a risk of plus or minus 25% of it. That's the definition. A Class B is plus or minus 10. So.
And if you remember that presentation, I had hand drawn the pump station on a napkin and put it on the PowerPoint for you. Now we can pull out. There's some.
It's very impressive.
I guess you're just getting your hopes up.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, the cost increase didn't surprise me at all, based on the detailed design that had been done, a sketch and a Class D estimate, no doubt that we were gonna go up in cost. I think the due diligence that has been done here to identify the design, do some more design work on the design, confirm that it's actually possible, and come up with a cost of the design is showing, that we're at a point where we really need to make a decision. And as stewards of this system, this is very close to the original cost estimate that we were looking at more than a year ago. It was $10 million to put a gravity system in. So I think it'd be nice if we could get some funding. I think it's gonna be a real challenge to get funding, because when you talk about core infrastructure, you talk about roads, water, wastewater, storm, public transit, you just don't see irrigation canals. There's not gonna be a program that's gonna fund this irrigation canal. If we find money federally, it's gonna be like we did provincially, where somebody's gonna come up and come with some dollars and give it to us at the end of the day. I think we have, as much as a hard pill to swallow, I think we're at a point where we need to make a decision done, it's a critical piece of infrastructure, we're stewards of the system. When you start talking about $172 million in economic loss if this fails, it pales in comparison to the cost to deal with the risk that we're facing on this project.
Councilor Mattis.
Just a quick question, looking through the cost estimates in the appendixes, I see that it says supply and install pump station as per detailed design drawings at 3.497 million. And then when you go down to the cost estimate for the pump station, the total is 4.5 million. And the difference is engineering and contingencies in between the two. Now, are those engineering and contingencies included in the other estimates under engineering and contingencies?
Correct, yes, yes.
So they've been added into those lines as
Yes,
well?
yeah. We benchmarked against these unit rates. We checked, this was done by True. We checked the unit rates, we did some checking of some of the quantities just to make sure we were comfortable, and we were comfortable with what they've done in terms of quantity, the unit rates for the piece of equipment and the components. We had a long discussion about how much we could include for engineering, how much we include for contingencies. And yes, we got an engineering contingency of 10% on each of them, and a construction contingency of 8%. But these are things that, these are risks that you know may occur. We categorize risks on what we call known knowns, which are not yet designed, but we know it's going to be designed. That's your design contingency or engineering contingency. Then there's the known unknowns, which are when you dig into the ground, you're not sure what you're going to find, but you know you're going to find something that you didn't want to see. Floating boulders, that type of thing. And then there's the unknown unknowns, which is where the risk contingency comes in. And you'll see in each of these, it hasn't been double counted. The owner's reserve, which is the risk contingency, has been excluded from the true numbers because we believe there's enough overall to carry this through. The only thing that has not been included here is escalation, forward escalation, because we don't know when this will actually go out into the market. So the sooner it goes into the market, probably the better. We don't know if and when the economy will start wobbling and come down, so prices come down, but there's no guarantee that that will happen. That's the only risk that we haven't covered.
Further questions, Councillor Bentamil?
I have a couple, if that's all right. The 8 foot, that's the original size we're talking about. How did we start talking about that size of pipe in the first place? It's never been used in BC. Where does that idea?
That is the size of pipe.
Oh, sorry.
When we looked at the options to go around Gallagher or the failure, we looked at 3 5-foot pipes by gravity or 1 8-foot. And at the time we had a slightly different alignment. If you remember, we were going up James Way. The pressures along that alignment allowed us to go concrete, which is what your current siphon under Gallagher Lake is. It's a 84-inch or something. It's like 7 foot something concrete. So it wasn't a stretch to go to 8-foot concrete, which was something that you have used before and currently own and operate. Where we're at now on our current alignment, it's longer than originally planned, and it goes through a lower area. The pressure is higher in the pipe, which has caused us to switch to fiberglass pipe as the proposed material, an 8-foot option. And that is a pipe that there's not a lot of experience with here. There's likely some in Alberta, because they have more canals there, or Washington. But our contracting fraternity around here will not have laid large diameter fiberglass pipe before.
Okay, so I'm sure that this is something that's been thought about, but I feel like I should ask it anyway. We've been doing better with our water conservation, and we talked about this before, switching from fruit to grapes, which is less water, but let's assume the worst and everybody starts using more and everybody goes back to soft fruit. All of our calculations have taken into consideration those numbers and increased demand and this
growth of your irrigation systems, there is nominal room for growth within the current committed capacity, which your systems have different commitments based on the flow rate per acre, which were developed around tree fruits. And we've seen a reduction in those demands as we go to vineyards. So as more converts to vineyards, we will likely be able to use the 5-foot option in its gravity. It will still work by gravity for a flow rate. The big idea here would be to try and maximize that, like try and operate the system differently to create the situation where we can not run the pumps in the pumping station. We'll have the choice, it can flow by gravity up to a flow, and then when we can't meet our demand, then we will switch to the pumps. And the pump system can provide your committed capacity to your current users plus some extra, but it's not, we're now limited to the capacity of the canal and the conversions and things like that. We would just never go beyond a certain capacity.
So this would limit us, or we are currently limited for
This was, the current pump station is proposed would not limit us, it would be the canal.
Oh, it's
Councillor Michelle.
Just popped into my head. So if we went with an 8-foot rather by concrete, whatever it's made of, so experience, what's the price difference between this thing and the new pipe? This fiberglass one versus the concrete 8-foot?
That's part of, this change where we were at 10 million and now we're at 13 million, is the pipe is more expensive. I don't have the exact number, mainly because concrete won't work. It's not an option.
The 8-foot was just too much of a.
The joints can't handle the pressure.
And yet you say we've got some experience with that. It's just
At lower
not
pressures.
at lower pressure, not the pressure that would be.
We're gonna be closer to 25 PSI and concrete starts failing at 15, I think. It's not even a choice.
Mayor Jones.
Just looking at the costing, Tim, would you consider this a sort of a worst case scenario with all of your contingencies and risk associated built into there? And I see you also, we're also talking about pre-ordering, paying for pipe. In all likelihood, the cost of this project would come in under the dollar value that we're talking about today.
Right. I hadn't gone through my recommendation of the commentary. One of the things we spoke about, which I think is valid, is Steve's used and I've used a procurement system where you pre-qualify a contractor and you work with them. And you, in terms of the pipe itself, is such a large quantity that if the town buys the pipe directly, you don't incur the markup from a contractor. You supply it. It's a standard pipe. The connectors, the collars, all that is bought under Steve's guidance by the town. You save that. You also probably can negotiate some kind of discount, which you want to negotiate equal to or better than what a civil contractor can negotiate like a supplier. You've got a place to store it and you use it. So yeah, we recommend that you use a procurement method that is to your benefit. It doesn't affect the actual construction and doesn't affect the long-term warranty because there's going to be a warranty on it. It doesn't affect the warranty because it's standard materials. It also means that a contractor, a civil contractor, does not need to finance a large purchase of pipe. The city's going to pay for it anyway, the town's going to pay for it anyway. So that would be a recommendation.
Councillor Michelle.
What would the pressure be on the 5-foot pipe? Because you would expect it to be higher if we're lifting, and I'm just kind of confused
Yeah,
with the 8-foot.
the 4-foot increase in head that we need, that would be a 3 PSI increase. So instead of running 25, it runs at 28.
And the 5-foot pipe can handle 28 versus the
5-foot PVC pipe can handle it. It's a water main.
It's a PVC.
It's a water PVC one.
Yeah.
Anyone else? We have a proposed motion that says that council resolve to proceed with the Gallagher Lake Lowhead Siphon repair and the Gallagher Siphon alternate design analysis and Gallagher Lake Siphon project life cycle cost analysis reports be received. So what is council's wish? Councilor Michelle.
I think we're putting the cart before the horse, we've gotta find out, which is the next item, how it's going to be paid for. Because there's some discussion about that, and that's really important. I don't think we can vote on this until to proceed without discussing that other item.
You'd have to vote at the regular meeting anyways.
Yeah, anyway, yeah, that's right. That's fine.
I thought the recommendation on your staff report,
It is the recommendation that
No,
we
but
proceed with the low-head siphon repair during budget deliberations.
you changed it, hadn't you? It never changed.
which one? The one that I'm looking at for, is that the committee of the whole recommends council direct staff to proceed with the low head siphon repair.
Yeah, that's what it says.
That's what it says
Oh,
on
okay.
my sheet here.
Okay,
I had made a change there.
But should that, are you suggesting that we add the words at budget?
I believe that we don't need to do this today, I think we can do this next meeting. I mean, we've got a budget meeting tomorrow where we're gonna discuss all these things, and it's kind of putting the cart before the horse, I really believe it. I mean, there's no rush to do it today, do it 2 weeks from now. We've got a lot of budget.
Mr. Goodsell and then Councilor Miles.
Okay, well, I believe our CFO is on the agenda next to talk about
Yes.
some of the financing, so maybe we let him do his thing and then we can have more discussion afterwards.
Councilor Mattis?
Yeah, I'm looking at the options and maybe I'm misreading them. The committee of the whole will receive this information and recommend council direct staff to proceed with the low head budget, or low head siphon repair during budget deliberations on November 13th.
Yes, what's wrong with that recommendation?
those
That's the
are, I'm sorry,
recommendation, I'm saying options.
I was looking at the recommendation in the report,
Oh.
not at the options, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the recommendation just says to proceed.
So the,
I would move option, myself would move that as that the committee will receive this information and recommends council direct staff to proceed with the low head siphon repair during budget deliberations on November 13th, 2019. I think that's the motion we're looking
Yeah.
for. And I will move that.
do I have a second? Councilor Michelle?
That's fine.
Further discussion, Councilor Ventimiglia.
So that means that we are then choosing the low head siphon repair as our favorite option of everything we've ever heard and seen. My question then would be, are there any drawbacks to choosing that option?
There's all this.
Power goes up.
I looked there, but over here.
See,
I'm sorry, the CAO.
Thank you, your worship.
He's the word.
Yeah.
Regular.
Chairman Schwartzenberger. There are risks, but after all the analysis that staff has gone through with professionals, we are saying that this is the option. The low head siphon repair is the one that is the best option to go with, and that's what we're recommending as staff. We've looked at it, we've looked at the cost, we've looked at everything, and it's the one that is the most economical for the town and the rural area. Plus, it is, it's been reviewed to the ninth. There's no more that you can actually review here or you'll never get anything going forward with regards to repairing this for a permanent fix.
Mayor Johansson.
I just wanted to add that I do feel comfortable this is the best option. And one of the reasons I say that is because of the due diligence and the questions that we've asked at the council table here. This wasn't even an option that was on the table a year ago. Looking at pumping and all things like that, this option popped up. And now the due diligence that's gone around to flesh it out as a real opportunity and a real viable solution. The engineering effort put into it and the third party review, I think I feel really confident that we've come up with the best option that there is. And it just goes to show you that the process kind of works. There was lots of discussion there wasn't even a discussion about pumping out of the river at one time, less than a year ago, and we talked about that option and we found some parameters that would work within. And I think this provides us flexibility to be able to provide some viability and reliability to the system.
Okay, I have a mover and a seconder. If there's no further discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Item 3 is Gallagher Siphon Financing. The Chief Financial Officer's report is attached, and I will turn this over to Mr. Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As part of the presentation by Steve and by Tim and the discussion that was already had, I was asked, and I went through the actual projects, assuming that the low head siphon option would be the one that would be recommended and chosen by council. Obviously, it's not without a big taller ticket item for the city, or for the town, I should say, of Oliver. So I went through some scenarios and just ran some scenarios when we went out and financed after we received the $5 million grant from the province, and we did some research. The CAO reached out to the province, and I was asking the province, how do we access the $5 million? What triggers the $5 million? And they came back saying, well, basically you have to come forward with your loan authorization, your commitment to the province that you're going to proceed with this project before we're going to release our $5 million. And so that's in my report as well. When I went through this, I came up with 3 distinct options that we presently, first of all, what we do currently, we've been allocating the increase in debt servicing. And when I say debt servicing, we're saying after we apply $5 million to the project, we'll have to borrow the rest of the money. Either we'll do it with a combination of using some reserve funding. We don't have that much in reserves to do that, knowing that we still have a capital program that we're going to look at tomorrow for the water system, as well as we will then borrow the remainder of that money. And when I was looking at borrowing, we're looking at 25-year borrowing at approximately a 3% interest rate. Right now, the Municipal Finance Authority is borrowing at 2.5% interest for, they go for 10 years, and then you have to renew it every 10 years. The debt servicing, or the mortgage payment in plain English, is about $387,000. What that equates to across the board, if we did that like we currently do it to all users, would be a 14.1% increase in water rates. If we did it based on option 2, which is the on irrigation acres, because this is a non-potable water system that is really benefiting only for irrigation. This isn't drinking water. This is for irrigation purposes. That split, about 96% of the irrigation acres are in the rural area, and 4% are in the town, so 96.4, and that you'd see the numbers, how that would be split up there, $371,000 to the rural area and approximately $15,500 in town. Then the third option was a hybrid of the second option, was saying, okay, if we divide it between in-town and irrigation customers, what would that look like? Knowing that our present cubic meter rate for potable water is 67 cents a cubic meter, and our irrigation rate is $232 per acre. The average acreage size, just so people are aware, is approximately 8 acres across the whole irrigation system. The acres, and the total acres that we have is about 3,100 acres of irrigable land. Therefore, then you start to see the hybrids of where if it was 100% on irrigation, it would be proposed at about $341 per acre. Based on an 8-acre parcel, that would be an average increase of $864 per annum for a irrigation user, all the way down to a 50-50 split, where it would be 50% would be going to the irrigation users, 50% to the potable water users, and through the irrigation users you'd see a $432 increase annually. And based upon what the average consumer of water uses, it would be approximately about a $14 or $15 per year increase for a home, for a residential home, using 30 cubic meters of water per month. 360 cubic meters annually. When I was researching this also, I just want to point out that this isn't without precedent. There has been different rate structure for residential versus potable versus non-potable. And I found back in 2008, there was a split in the rates, increase going to domestic versus irrigation, as well as 2010. There was also a split at that point in time when the meters were put in, and the rate went up 10% for metered customers and 6% for agricultural. So there has been precedent that there's different rates for different types of users. And keep in mind that this is non-potable water. With that, I will leave it at that, and we are, like as council has suggested, we will be discussing this further tomorrow as well as the water budget.
Councilor Michelle.
I think his hand up is first, but I'll start.
I just have one quick question.
Just to highlight, I was on council, I don't know if Mr. Mattis was on council or not, when we did the 2010, were you here already? Because I can tell you what the rationale behind that was, is that it would be too much of a hardship on agricultural users to have a 10% that year. And council, both those instances felt that they were sympathetic with that, because when you're taking a percentage of a large number, it's a lot of dollars versus a percentage of a small number. And you kind of highlighted that with the average domestic, it would be $13 or $15 versus if we went full blown $800. Second of all, that was the reason for those two. And so it was actually the opposite of what you're thinking, that we, you know, in actual fact, it was actually council's sympathy towards agricultural users, because it is very difficult to make a living out there. I mean, if we were to go with any other hybrid other than everybody's paying for it, then I'm not gonna be supporting any of this, because there's no way the farmer can afford this. We've already got some of the highest rates in the valley for our agricultural users. We can't put our people at a disadvantage. They've gotta make a living like everybody else. I mean, there's just no way they can afford it. I know if they had a vote, they would vote against it. They would take their chances and leave the pipe where it is. I mean, there's no way. I mean, and I looked at the budget tomorrow, and we're looking at 2-3% to be able to do this, because we've already collected some money towards this. We've been collecting money for the last number of years. So it's not a huge increase. You know, it's a very low dollar increase for everybody to pay for domestic users. If you stick that in agriculture, forget it, it's over. It's not gonna happen. I'll tell you that right now. There's no way they can afford it.
Councilor Mattis.
My question was just, what is this based on in terms of how much are we borrowing? I didn't see that anywhere.
What was the total
It's
project?
almost 6 points.
That was enough to cover the whole.
$6.5 million.
Enough to cover the whole project?
Yes.
Yeah,
With
no,
no reserves
It's
going?
worst case scenario, no reserves. Because, and the reason why is I suggested,
Well, I don't-
No,
That's
no.
why I asked the question.
the reason why though, is as I stated when I was doing my report, was because we have a capital plan coming forward as well tomorrow on the capital budget. So to take everything out of reserves, when you still have a water system to operate that's potable water, you
Well,
need
but
to look at that
But
option
to
as well.
counter that, a lot of what you've been collecting it is for this project. So then you would leave your reserves in and just go borrow it, but that doesn't make sense. Then why would you have increased your rates towards this project the last number of years? I mean, that's to build reserves, to then use the reserves. As a businessman, I would never borrow money if I can use my own money. Only governments seem to think that it's a viable option. The differential in interest rate alone makes more business case to use your own money. I mean, why would you ever do that?
Well, I
I know,
agree
because I
to
know
disagree
government-
with you, but
Yeah, I-
regardless of that, the other comment I would make, the money that you were raising with the rates already, with that 2017 resolution that was passed, that is being allocated to all the users, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so they are contributing to the agriculture users
Yeah,
significantly.
that's right, and the agriculture users have been contributing for
Yeah,
30 years to the
absolutely.
television. I mean, any project that's ever been done in or out of town has been paid by everybody. So
No.
if we deviate now, it's gonna be a major deviation.
I'm not the one arguing with you or
No,
debating.
I understand, I'm just making, I'm making that statement.
Yeah,
Because when I read this report, you say there's a precedent, well, the precedent of 30 years of doing it the other way is which one do you follow? I mean, the town has to look at a lot of things, and we'll have those discussions tomorrow with council, but there's a huge transfer of wealth from the rural people, from irrigation users towards the town to help them pay for staff wages. I looked at the budget after it was emailed to me, and there's a $400,000 in staff allocation and a $200,000 towards paying for the buildings and the public works yard. That's $600,000 that the town benefits every year Now, mind you, it's not all from the rural area, because we've gotta check, there's people in town that have water and people outside of town. But there's a massive, millions of dollars have come to the town from the rural area to help pay for all the other costs over all these years. I mean, that would be higher taxes. So there's been a subsidy towards taxes from getting this money to help pay for all, to share in all these, in all these costs. I mean, you gotta look at the whole picture. You can't just look at one thing.
I would just say, if I may jump in here, and then I'll give Councillor Grice her chance, that I agree that I think it's always been, or the time I've been on council anyway, it's always been one water system. So we should, I believe that it should be split between, or paid for by everyone. Councillor Michelle's comments about the funding coming from water to, or from the water fund to support buildings and staff, that's because the buildings and staff are used for the water fund. So it's all a balancing act, but I do believe that, for my opinion, that the water system should be treated as one system and we should all pay for it on an equal basis. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the CFO, what's the total amortization? Are we looking at 30 years still?
25 years.
25 years.
Councillor Matt.
Well, you covered basically part of what I was going to say. If the water system was separated town and rural, which it isn't, because it is one system, I think Councilor Michelle would find that running the old solid yard like they used to with, in today's day and age, would easily add up to $600,000 per year with separate staff and separate operators for the water system.
No argument.
So it's,
I
so
understand.
if there's no argument, then I'm glad you agreed that in essence, the town is subsidizing the rural.
Well, no, but you have to.
Or let's just call it a draw.
Let's call it a draw.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I understand, but there has been benefit, because all these years, the staff wages were contributed by rural dollars as well. When they were affected by, that's
it's
what
worked well.
I agree.
It's worked well
I
for
agree.
both of us, we're not gonna
But
change.
if it hadn't had, yeah, there, thank you, you just said something, because.
Mayor Johansson.
Thanks, through the chair. Yeah, I agree. You know, I would say, looking at this back in the day, I would have thought, why would the town pay for all the stuff out in the rural area? But it's clear that the rural area provides a lot of economy that benefits the town. So there's a hand in hand that goes on, and I think sharing those costs make total sense. We can talk about the split, whether it's 100% or whatever, but you know, it definitely needs to be that way in some shape or form. The other thing is, just one second.
No,
Councilor-
just one here.
Councilor Mattis. The other thing is, I think we also need to pay attention here that this project has a 20-month, is it, Steve, about a 20-month construction period?
Yeah.
And we will be spending the $5 million first, which would mean in 2020, we may not even spend $5 million, looking at the Gantt chart for construction schedule there. So there will be opportunity again to chip away at how much money we actually borrow, because we're going to do short-term borrowing first, and then once the project's done, we'll roll that into long-term borrowing. So there's savings in the project around in terms of delivery and buying materials. We can contribute some money out of the reserve to the project as well, or we can contribute some capital money that we might have been spending on some nice-to-haves and put that toward an asset that we really need to maintain. So there is opportunities down the road as well, once we get into this project, to try and keep the amount of borrowing as low as possible, which keeps the cost to everybody at the end of the day as low as possible as well. Would that be a fair statement, Chief?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, totally.
Councillor Mattis.
I think I'll pass on the question that I had.
Okay.
I've somewhat answered it myself.
Anyone else? We're gonna obviously revisit this tomorrow at length. So the proposed motion is that the committee of the whole receive the chief financial officer's report for information. And moved by Councillor Grice, seconded by Councillor Ventimiglia. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. And public question period. I don't see any public. our two gentlemen would like to ask a question? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Councilor Rice, Councilor Ventimiglia, all in favor, opposed, carried. Thank you very much.
Could you guys do sewer?